Alright, welcome back to our pretty old Leah. I drew Leah here in a relatively neutral expression, though with her RBF kind of vibes, I think it's very hard to make a neutral expression for her, but here she's not smiling or anything like she was in the last video, but I thought for expressions, what better way to practice making expressions than having our own character and then varying their facial structures in order to capture different kind of feelings that they might be feeling. And so, how do we approach this topic, right? Well, first things first, you're going to want to observe how real life expressions work. And so, let me pull up some examples of expressions. I chose some pretty extreme looking ones so I could show you how we create expressions. And so, let me zoom in. So, we see here that all of them are pretty much kind of not your generic, just a smile, ha 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 ha. Instead, the way we capture expression is typically through the eyes, right here, through the eyes, the eyebrow, and the corner of the lips. And so you can see here, this guy looks sort of inquisitive, very curious, very sarcastic almost, and you can see that's formed by his eyebrows because they're pinching upwards this way, and this one is raised up, whereas this eye is squinted in. His mouths are lopsided, almost as though to capture that kind of smirk, which creates that sarcastic kind of feel. And so if we follow the direction of the eyebrows, we can simplify it as to his eyebrow follows this curve, his eyes right here, this, and his mouth is tilted like this, right? So that's the general direction that his expressions are following. And to capture that, to actually draw that out, we're going to fill that out. So with his eyebrows, we're going to follow that curve that we created, push that up, push that eyebrow arch up specifically, because if you look at your own face, when you raise your eyebrows, it's really only that arch of your eyebrow that is raising up. It's not the whole eyebrow. And that's because you have like muscles here that will help raise up this part of your eyebrow more so than say this part. As for the rest of his expression, you can see that if we simplify it, he's looking at us and he's squinting. And you have to capture that by making sure you draw the little eye bags underneath. And this one is relaxed. So you're going to see a lot more of his actual iris and pupil than say this one where he's squinting, where you're basically seeing only about half of that. And he still has eye bags because that's just how his facial structure works. His eyebrows are popping out, which is why he has this very distinct eye bag right here. Similar to how Korean makeup tries to emphasize the aegasol, the little puffy part of the under eye. As for a smile, we're going to follow that direction of that line that we made before and make sure we stress on this particular wrinkle because this is the important part that creates the expression. This is like the deepest part, and so if you capture that, if you don't capture that, then you kind of lose the expression. It'll look flat like this, right? Not really that forced of a smile. And I'll just draw in his nose real quick. And that's the general idea for this expression. Now, this is supposedly sort of a more casual, light expression. If we're talking about anger or worry or disgust, that's where the eyebrows sort of furrow into your nose bridge, and we get like expressions like this man right here. His eyebrows right here, you see that they create this wrinkle right on the nose bridge, and they pinch in to create sort of a smaller region for that nose. So when you're drawing anger, you're going to want to make sure you capture that kind of shrinkage of the nose bridge between the eyebrow area. And you're going to notice that typically there's going to be a wrinkling of the skin, especially around the top part of the nose bridge, because everything is so scrunched up as if when you're super frustrated, you're like, "Arr!" right? You want to crush everything into a little ball of paper. So when you're drawing expressions, you're going to want to shrink everything in, right? And so his eyebrows, specifically the inner corners, are going to be facing downwards, whereas the top part stays relatively high up. And in here, his eyes are relatively open. So we can just quickly draw an eye like that. So I'm drawing sort of a slanted table kind of shape, and then adding the iris in there, and then doing a slight bottom lid, implying that the eye closes off. But since it's so far away, you don't really often need to do it all. Now let's draw in some nostrils. Now for the mouth and the surrounding wrinkles, because it's an angry expression, we tend to create these furrowed stress lines, especially around the nose. Remember, we're scrunching everything in towards that central point right here. And so that's why we're going to get these stress lines. And if you capture them, you're going to look extra, extra angry. And he seems to be mid-sentence talking, so that's why his mouth looks almost like a clamshell, like that kind of clamshell. Let me erase this because we're going to simplify this expression. When I'm looking at his face and his mouth, I'm trying to analyze, okay, what's the general shape of that mouth, right? The general shape of that mouth is this. I need to make sure I capture these corners of the lips. So I gotta exaggerate that part just a little bit. Alright, so if I'm gonna be doing this here, I capture that expression. Something like that, right? It won't be perfect because with just line art, you're missing the shadows that comes from the lip being pursed like that, right? In which case, it won't look exactly like it, but I think we captured the general expression of him opening his mouth as if mid-speech to say, you, kind of thing. Now, I used this photo previously to show you about how to draw mouths, right? But again, we're going to come back and analyze this photo as a whole. Look, what makes this girl look like she's sort of angry yet sort of playful, right? Again, note her eyebrows are sort of like a V shape. She has the scrunching going down here. She has some slight wrinkles here. And her mouth is wide open, right? Her eyes are slightly squinting too, as you can see, just ever so slightly. So in order to capture that expression, we're gonna do our little guide marks. Remember, with the skull, we use guide marks. We use the middle line to indicate the direction of the face and as like the midline, and that's where your nose is gonna lie and where your mouth is gonna lie. And so eyebrow, eye, your nose is about here, and her mouth sits somewhere around here, right? So if we follow that, we're gonna make sure the inner corners are pursed downwards. Inner corners pursed downwards. And then we do just a little bit indication that her brow is furrowed. we make sure that we draw a little bit of those wrinkles because her eyebrows are scrunching up, so that little section of her nose bridge is going to also scrunch up in response to it. We'll give ourselves a really generic eye where she's squinting, so again, you're not going to see that full pupil and iris. Because she's looking up at us, this part of the eyelid is being pushed inwards as you look upwards. Same for this side, it's going to get pushed upwards, sort of like that. Right, we make sure we capture that kind of squinty look. Make sure you don't do too far of the bottom lid line, or else it's going to look like you're drawing sort of a full-on eye, right? We draw some lines here to showcase that the stress marks wrinkles extend into this area, as you can see. And we're just trying to simulate the idea of anger, right? Right here, we're going to indicate just a little bit of that stress line because that's where you really get extreme anger. And her mouth again. It's a little mountain valley. Her teeth wraps around, her tongue's going to stick out. And there you got an angry expression, and that was accomplished just by making sure that you furrowed the brows, you added the stress marks, making sure that the nose gets some of those anger wrinkles like that. Some will even extend all the way downwards like this. Just try not to do too much or else you're going to get a very wrinkly face, right? And we're making sure that we capture this stress mark right here. Right, so that's how you capture that particular expression. And then one final examination of a really extreme kind of expression, again with the scrunching of the face. Eyebrows and the nose basically zoop, collapse into a black hole, and it all becomes this tiny little diamond section, right? So when you're capturing this expression, you're going to want to do a similar idea. And so again, we're going to figure out the general direction of the eyebrows. So the eyebrows are going to lie on this mountain shape along the skull. And something I learned from another artist is when you're trying to draw eyebrows for good expression capture, you're going to want to connect them. So if you can't draw a continuous line between your eyebrows, then that means you didn't draw your eyebrows correctly, and that's why it looks sort of disconnected as for the expression. So even if you're going to do one eyebrow like this and one eyebrow that's raised up like this, you can see that it still connects, right? Can't just do an eyebrow that does like this. It won't work. It doesn't look as smooth or genuine, right? Because your eyebrows don't work like that. Your eyebrows follow a curve. So even if you are to do a surprised expression, questioning expression, anger, They all have to follow this sort of smooth connection. All right, so moving away from that quick eyebrow tutorial, let's get back to analyzing how we draw the expression of the sky, right? So again, general shape of the eyebrow. I'm gonna shrink this baby so I have a little more space. Or better yet, let's just expand my canvas because I can and I have the power. Alright, so first things first, what do? We analyze the direction of the eyebrows. They're sitting sort of like an M-shaped mountain. This part's gonna be furrowed, so we have to make sure we capture that furrowedness. Eyes are squinted with the eye bags. Stress lines, wrinkles. All the telltale signs of a very highly emotive person, right? So let's get our eyebrows down. Add in some general guidelines so we're not just sitting ducks out here fumbling around the dark. So we draw ourselves some eyes that are closed. It's just real simple shaded in curves. And here's where we get to have fun. We get to play around with the shapes of those wrinkles. Vary the thickness of those lines to make it seem like there's shadow, right? So you don't have to like work so hard. Put in our nose, add in our stress lines. And his mouth, while we may be tempted to draw open happy face like this, if we're drawing realistically, look at how the shape it is. Move that away. It's actually more like that, right? So when we're drawing, we can exaggerate a little, but we have to make sure we keep this general shape in order for it to read correctly. So we gotta make sure we keep that kind of roundness of the top that comes from wrapping around the teeth. Put in our teeth, fangs, molars, etc. You can always simplify since it's cartoony or semi-realism. We don't have to be too concerned about putting in every single teeth, but obviously you want to make sure you capture the general shape or shadow lighting of the teeth in order for it to read properly, right? And the way to think about teeth again, imagine you put your hands together in paws, right? Put them together, pretend you're like chomping like you're a little alligator. So if you can imagine your teeth acting sort of like that, except with molars and everything, then it's like a really good way for you to imagine how you would draw and put your teeth in at any angle. If you've had braces like me, and you have retainers, then I would suggest looking at how those retainers fit into your teeth. And that's like a really good way for you to understand how you can simplify the shape of teeth when you're putting it into a mouth. Basically, his bottom mouth is like super open, right? So you're gonna catch all that shadow, you're gonna see his tongue, you're gonna see the top of that teeth, top of that bottom jaw. I want to make sure we capture that squint. And since his jaw does open, that means the size and the shape of the face skull has to match that. So you have to make sure you elongate that. So let's now try to create some expressions for Leah, right? So let me put this buddios away. Bust her out so we have a good reference photo of her for her features and everything. I'm gonna move her to the side. And let's start with happy. Are you happy? Happy? Sad? Mad? Confused? Surprised? And I guess we could do something creative like disgust or something. Pending TM. Let's start with happy first. Alright, so I'm gonna give myself more space so we get to enjoy this process, and so let's bust this baby open. Look, that should be enough space for us to do our magic. Alright, I'm gonna shrink my brush just a tiny bit so I can actually see. To our basic guidelines. And again, Leah is the counterpart of Leo, who has a very cool kid, kind of sly cat vibe. So we gotta make sure that her face is slightly more thin or oval than, say, a heart shape or circle. Throw in the hair real quick. We're not going to be shading these for time's sake. But maybe I will, depending on how I feel later on, whether or not I feel like the expression was truly captured, or maybe I'll even touch up on how you would shade these expressions, right? I think first things first, when you're happy, you're genuinely going to see that show up in the eyes. So if you're happy, you tend to squint just a little bit. And because her eyes are squinted, that means her irises aren't going to be in full view. And based on her character, I'm assuming that she wouldn't really smile with her mouth open too widely, because she is sort of a very cat-like kind of character, right? Now say if she were really happy and she had her mouth open. Let's cut this out and hide it. Duplicate it. And say maybe she is really, really happy. She's super, super duper happy, right? We're gonna end up seeing maybe even her eye end up being closed because she's so happy. And as such, we gotta make sure that those eyelids are closing closer up to the upper eyelash because she is squinting and it's gonna end up pushing her eyes upwards a little bit. Because her mouth is opening, we gotta make sure her chin gets slightly longer to showcase that she opened her mouth. And because she's opening her mouth so wide, you're gonna end up seeing even maybe a little bit of that mouth and the gum in the back. Something like that. I'm gonna push these features just slightly up to match the overall upward feeling that you're getting from her expression, right? Let's compare this, which is sort of happy. It's just a coy little smile she's giving you, right? Versus, whoa, she's like crazy happy right now. Like she hit the jackpot. She won that 300 million California lotto. She never has to work a day in her life ever again. So we're just gonna keep that right there, that cool little baby. Clean up some of those lines. Erase that. Erase that. All right. Now what about sad, right? Well, same idea. We're gonna copy ourselves over and just change up the various features. Work smart, not hard, right? And you can do this when you're trying to make your own character expression sheet. Just copy it over, erase the things in order for it to match up to the expressions. And you don't have to work too hard to get the stuff that remains constant, say like her hair and her face shape, right? Now, if she's sad, I'm imagining that her eyebrows are gonna be pulling up slightly just like this. You're gonna lose some of that really sharp eyebrow. As though she's pushing her eyebrows upwards. But the tails of her eyebrows are still gonna remain that same height, just the front parts of that are gonna be lifted up. Maybe she's squinting her eyes because she's about to tear up. I don't know about you, but there's something about drawing a character that has tears in their eyes that makes me feel things, right? I don't know. It just looks so pretty sometimes. Does that make me a sadist for liking tears? Or does that just make me a crazy freak who just likes to drop water? Right, let's see. Little tears. And quick pro tip, tears usually form in the inner corner of the eye before they form on the outer corner. So if there's tears on the outer corner, that means the inner corner's already dropped their little teardrop. Yeah, here's where you're going to see the lip play a huge role, because when you're sad, you feel that lip kind of purse up, right? So you got to capture that. And maybe her little nose bridge is going to do a little wrinkle because she's about to full on bawl. And so there we go, we got sad. Right, real small changes, but those small changes make a big difference for determining your expressions. Now let's try mad. Now if you're mad, again, we saw before, when you're mad, everything scrunches up because you're so mad. You want to ball it all up and throw it against a wall, right? So we gotta do that for ourselves. Let me start labeling these before I forget what they are. Sad times, sad boy hours, don't make me mad, the OG, and finally, super fun sparks. So let's work on the mad expression. And if you're mad again, you're pulling those eyebrows down, only the front part, right? And they're gonna push inwards like this. And you're gonna capture that sort of wrinkle in the nose, squint in the eye, get that stress mark that happens. And we exaggerate it, especially since this is stylization, we get to exaggerate that mouth shape. We want to be careful with how we do our wrinkles, or else she's going to end up looking like an old grandma, right? So let's capture the first basic mouth shape. She's shouting and she's even pushing her lips downward. If you observe your expression when you're pushing your mouth downwards, you're going to end up seeing some wrinkles here, but be very minimal about it or else she's going to look super old, right? Showcase her teeth and her gums. If you're able to do that, then it helps solve some of the issues about the wrinkles, because it'll help show the viewer that her mouth is open, wide open, right? Alright, I drew wrinkles that point inwards to this little central spot, right? So that's a mad Leah. A very mad Leah. Duplicate our OG again. I had imagined that confused, you'd get sort of a half raised, half rested, kind of furrowed eyebrow look, right? So this eyebrow is probably going to be furrowed. Whereas this might be raised up, right? And when it's raised up, your eyelid is also going to get a little bigger just because you're giving more space between your eye socket and your eyeball. And so like it's going to lift up and give you some of that eyelid space back. And so we're back to that neutral expression where her eyes are more open. And we're going to have a slight tilt. Almost as if she's in thought, right? So her mouth's going to be sort of a straight line, it's tilted, pursed a little bit. Rename this baby to Shook. Then we're just gonna go ahead, do ourselves a favor, make one last duplicate for our final one. Just leave that sitting there for a hot sec to ew. Let's work on the surprised expression. And if you look at your face, or when I think of surprised, I usually think that your eyebrows, both eyebrows tend to be raised, eyes tend to be wide open, mouth may be agape, depends on how shocked you are. Like that kind of shocked, you'd get kind of a wider mouth, whereas if you're just like a genuine, oh, huh? Oh, really? That kind of shocked, maybe your mouth stays closed. But I think for practice sake, let's try a mouth open to kind of practice exaggerating our features, right? Don't be afraid to like push these various features. And so first, we're gonna raise her eyebrows. And so those front parts of her eyebrows are gonna get raised up, whereas the back part is gonna stay. And it's going to look a lot more like a curve rather than an arch because of how eyebrows get raised. And as a result, she's going to end up with her eyes having a lot more space for her eye socket. Again, you get a lot more eyelid space this time because it's raised up. You might even see some of the wrinkles that come from eyebrows that are raised up, just slightly right here. And you're going to want to make sure that your irises are in full view, and that's how you're going to capture a surprised, wide-eyed look, right? If her irises aren't in full view, it's going to be very hard to sell the idea that her eyes are wide open. And as a result, her eyelashes are going to get pushed down just a slight bit because her eyes are fully open now. And you're going to leave a little bit of whites of her eyes underneath. Making sure to extend that jaw because her mouth is open. The more space you can give between her iris and the whites of her eyes, the more surprised she's going to actually end up looking. And you won't be seeing too much of the bottom teeth because when you're surprised, unlike when you're angry, you're not trying to expose your angry words, your hurtful words. You're just opening your mouth in response and letting in air, right? So your mouth is still going to sort of cover up those teeth. And for our final one, how would you describe disgust, right? When I think of disgust, I think of furrowed eyebrows. One side of the face is raised up as though I just smelled something and now it doesn't smell right, right? So furrowed eyebrows. And overall, we're trying to capture a very judgmental look, right? So we're going to have some asymmetry in that. We're going to go back to her RBF face. And since again you are furrowing the brows, you're going to end up with some wrinkles in the center. And the keynote is the mouth is asymmetrical. You have one side that is raised up a lot more and is creating this really strong stress mark, whereas this side is just slightly frowning. And this side is going to expose more of the teeth than, say, the other side. Right. And there we got somewhat of a disgusted face. And so with that, we've created our own very own character expression sheet. And so as long as you understand the basics of what makes up an expression, you can just basically change these up based on the character's features. If it's a man, they probably have thicker eyebrows or they have a different nose. Same idea though. And so I'll see you next time when we finally start talking about bodies and how to draw bodies in various angles, various poses, and how to learn how to get better at drawing body poses naturally from your brain.